As someone who has followed the Assassin's Creed franchise from the very beginning, I can't help but feel a deep sense of nostalgia and disappointment when reflecting on the series. There was a time when Assassin's Creed games truly meant something and were truly special, offering rich, character-driven narratives set against the backdrop of intricately designed historical settings. They were more than just games, they were journeys through time, explorations of moral ambiguity, and thrilling experiences that made you feel like a true assassin, bound by a code and fighting for freedom against a shadowy enemy. Yet as the years have passed and more games have come out, this series has slowly morphed into something else entirely. Something bloated, generic, and soulless. In the wake of the sprawling, grindy heavy titles like Origins, Odyssey, and Valhalla, it is hard to see this franchise as anything more than a hollow shell of what it once was. And what it once was my favorite video game franchise of all time at one point. And for me, Assassin's Creed Syndicate marks the last time the franchise truly lived up to its name. It was the final entry in the series that held onto the spirit of what Assassin's Creed was meant to be, an experience rooted in stealth, history, and a deep narrative connection to the Assassins Brotherhood. Set against the misty, gaslit streets of Victorian London, Syndicate was the perfect swan song for a series that was about to lose its way forever. It is, in my eyes, the last good and true Assassin's Creed game, the last game that wasn't trying to be an RPG, the last game that didn't sacrifice its soul for massive open world bloat, and the last game that genuinely cared about its characters, its world, and its lore. Everything that came after, in my view, is little more than generic Ubisoft open world garbage. But Syndicate, that was truly the end of a phenomenal era. The true heart of Assassin's Creed has always been the conflict between the Assassins and the Templars, a philosophical and ideological war that spanned literal centuries. The Assassins stood for freedom, free will, and individual choice, while the Templars sought for control, order, and the enforcement of a rigid system. This was the core of the series, two opposing factions locked in an eternal struggle over the future of humanity. And in Assassin's Creed Syndicate, this conflict is still alive, still personal, and still meaningful. It's the last game where the Brotherhood itself feels central to the story, and where the struggle between freedom and control drives the plot forward in a way that feels grounded in the series' original ethos. The Fry twins, Evie and Jacob, are two of the most interesting characters in the franchise because they embody two sides of the Assassin's Creed franchise. Evie is the purist, the one who values stealth, subtlety, and adherence to the Creed's core tenets. She understands the importance of operating in the shadows, of striking unseen, and of staying true to the Brotherhood's mission. Jacob, on the other hand, is the rebel, the one who believes that sometimes brute force is necessary, that the assassins need to adapt to a changing world, and perhaps the Creed needs to evolve. This sibling dynamic is not only fascinating to watch, but it also mirrors the tension within the Brotherhood itself, a tension between tradition and evolution, between following the old ways and adapting to the new. In Syndicate, you still feel like an assassin. The game is deeply rooted in the ideology of the Brotherhood, and every mission, every encounter with the Templars reinforced that central conflict. You aren't just running around completing fetch quests or grinding for better loot, you're dismantling Templar influence over London, liberating oppressed workers and taking part in a centuries-old battle for the soul of humanity. Every assassination has weight because it's tied to something larger, a narrative about freedom and control, choice and tyranny. It's a far cry from the more recent entries in the series, where the Assassins vs Templar conflict has all but basically vanished, replaced by vague notions of ancient orders and mythological quests that have nothing to do with the core of what Assassin's Creed once was. Syndicate is, quite simply, the last game in the franchise where the Brotherhood truly mattered. In games like Origins and Odyssey, the Assassins are either non-existent or barely relevant, reduced to the background lore in a vast open world full of distractions and side quests that have nothing to do with the central conflict. But in Syndicate, the Brotherhood is still front and center, still fighting the good fight, and still bound by the creed that defined this series for so long. Victorian London, with its smog-choked streets, looming factories, and towering landmarks, is one of the most immersive and detailed settings in the Assassin's Creed franchise. It's a city on the cusp of modernity, torn between the old and the new, between the aristocracy and the working class, between progress and exploitation. London in the 1860s was a place where history was being made, where industry and empire collided, and where the Templars naturally thrived. And in Syndicate, you get to walk those streets, climb those buildings, and take part in the chaos of a world being reshaped by the forces of power and greed. It's a setting that feels alive, dynamic, and above all historically grounded, a far cry from the mythological landscapes of Greece and the Viking homelands. One of the most beautiful things about Syndicate is how it blends history with the fantastical elements of the Assassin's Creed universe without ever quite losing its focus. You meet historical figures like Charles Dickens, Charles Darwin, and Florence Nightingale, but they never feel shoehorned into the plot for the sake of star power. They serve a purpose within the narrative and fit naturally into the world of Victorian London. These characters don't just exist to give you side quests, they help you to further the story of Brotherhood's struggle against Templar control. In contrast, later games in this series have taken to inserting mythological figures and gods into the story, blurring the line even more between historical fiction and outright fantasy in ways that feel disconnected from what the series was originally about. What I love about Syndicate is that it doesn't lose sight of the fact that it is an Assassin's Creed game, and that at its heart, about history. There's still an assassin navigating real-world events, shaping the course of history, and fighting against the forces that want to control it and everyone. The Industrial Revolution in London is not just a backdrop, it's a crucial part of the story. The factories, the child labor, the class struggle, all of it ties into the assassin's mission to liberate the city from Templar rule. You feel like you're part of something larger, something historically significant, and the game doesn't need to rely on grandiose mythology or supernatural powers to tell its story. History itself is the story, and that's what makes it feel true to the franchise. In later games like the aforementioned Odyssey and Valhalla, the historical setting feels more like theme parks than living, breathing worlds. They're vast, yes, but they are also empty, full of meaningless side quests and repetitive tasks that have nothing to do with the overarching narrative. You don't feel like you're part of history anymore. You feel like you're playing an RPG with an Assassin's Creed skin slapped onto it. The sense of immersion, of being in a real place at a real time in history, is lost. But in Syndicate, London feels authentic, alive, and meaningful, and it is the last time the series gave us a setting that wasn't just a sandbox. It was a story. At the heart of what made Assassin's Creed great was its stealth-based gameplay. You were always the shadow in the crowd, the unseen blade, the silent predator waiting to strike. And in Assassin's Creed Syndicate, this core mechanic is still intact, still rewarding, and still feels like it's the heart of the game. It's the last time I felt like the series respected the player's desire to be an assassin, to operate from the shadows, and to use cunning and skill rather than brute force to take down enemies. In later games, stealth has almost become optional, just another tool in a bloated RPG toolkit where combat, looting, and grinding take precedence. But in Syndicate, stealth is still king. One of the best additions to Syndicate was the grappling hook, a tool that made traversing London's towering buildings and tight alleyways faster and more fluid than ever before. It was a brilliant innovation that added a new layer of verticality to the game without sacrificing the stealth mechanics that had always defined this series. With the grappling hook, you could zip across rooftops, quickly reposition yourself during missions, and perform devastating aerial assassinations. It felt like a natural evolution of the parkour system, making movement through the city both exhilarating and strategic. The combat system in Syndicate also feels like a refinement of everything that came before it. While Jacob's brawling, heavy brute style is more aggressive, there's still a sense of precision and timing required to succeed in fights. You can't just button mash your way through enemies, you have to dodge, counter, and strike with purpose. The game rewards players for using their environment to their advantage, whether that's by creating distractions, using smoke bombs, or setting traps. It's a far cry from the mindless hack and slash combat that would dominate later titles like Odyssey and Valhalla, where battles became drawn-out affairs of chipping away at enemy health bars. In Syndicate, every encounter feels like it has a weight, like there's a reason behind every fight. You aren't just mindlessly taking down enemies to level up or grind for loot, you're dismantling a Templar-controlled city piece by piece. Each mission feels purposeful and connected to the overarching narrative of liberating London from Templar control. In later games, combat becomes more of a numbers game. How much damage you could deal, how much loot you could collect, how many enemies you could kill in one area. But in Syndicate, combat and stealth still felt intertwined, and every mission you went on still felt like it had a meaningful connection to the overarching story of Assassin's Creed. What made the early Assassin's Creed games, in particular Assassin's Creed 2, Brotherhood, Revelations, and Black Flag, was not just the historical settings or the stealth mechanics, it was the characters. All the way from the beginning of the series with Altair, all the way to Edward Kenway in Black Flag and beyond, this series has always been driven by compelling protagonists with personal stakes in the Assassin-Templar conflict. And in Syndicate, The Fry twins continue this tradition, offering two distinct perspectives on what it means to be an assassin. Jacob with his brash, reckless approach to the Brotherhood's mission, and Evie with her disciplined, calculated methods, are two sides of the same assassin coin. Their sibling rivalry and dynamic personalities make for one of the most engaging and interesting narratives in the franchise, and their character arcs are deeply tied to the central conflict between freedom and control. What I loved most about Syndicate, and while this game wasn't perfect, was how it used its characters to explore the moral complexities of the Assassin-Templar conflict. Jacob's methods may be more brutal, but they're effective, and in a city as corrupt as London, sometimes brute force was necessary. Evie, on the other hand, is a purist, someone who believes in the ideals of the Creed and wants to uphold the Brotherhood's values at all costs. Watching the two siblings clash over their differing approaches to the same goal was fascinating, and it added a layer of depth to the story that I found lacking in later games. In Syndicate, the characters were not just avatars for the player to control. They were fully realized people with distinct personalities, motivations, and struggles. The narrative in Syndicate is tightly focused on the Fry twins, and their mission to liberate London from Templar control was enthralling. Every mission, every side quest, and every assassination they went on felt connected to the central goal, and it was deeply satisfying to watch the city slowly slip out of Templar hands as you progress throughout the game. In contrast, later games like Odyssey and Valhalla feel sprawling and unfocused, with endless side quests and distractions that have little to do with the main story. The narrative in those games is diluted by the sheer size of the open world and the countless activities you're expected to complete, leaving little room for character development or meaningful, everlasting storytelling. In Syndicate, the story is personal, the stakes are high, and the characters are memorable. It's the last time I felt truly invested in the narrative of an Assassin's Creed game, and that's one of the reasons why I consider it the last good entry in the series. The characters in Syndicate felt like they belonged in the world of Assassins and Templars, and their journey felt like it actually mattered. In the end, Assassin's Creed Syndicate represents the final entries in the series that truly understood what it meant to be an Assassin's Creed game. It was the last game to fully embrace the series' core tenets: stealth, historical accuracy, parkour, and the eternal struggle between the Assassins and the Templars. Every game that has come after it, Origins, Odyssey, Valhalla, and now Assassin's Creed Shadows, has strayed further and further from those original pillars, becoming more like generic open-world RPGs than true Assassin's Creed titles. While those games may still be fun in their own right and have their own audience, they lack the soul and focus that made the earlier entries so spectacular and so special. In Syndicate, you still feel like an assassin. You're still bound by the Creed, still part of an order fighting against a shadowy enemy. You're not a mythical hero, a mercenary, or a Viking. You're an assassin, operating in the shadows, dismantling Templar influence over a real, breathing, historical city. The game's mechanics, narrative, and design are all focused on that core experience, and it is the last time this series truly felt like it had a clear identity. The shift towards RPG mechanics and massive open worlds in the later games may have broadened the franchise's appeal, but in doing so, it lost what made it so infinitely and truly unique. The Assassin-Templar conflict has been reduced to background noise, the stealth mechanics are optional at best, and the historical settings have become little more than glorified playgrounds for players to explore. The sense of purpose, of being part of something larger, is gone. But in Syndicate, that purpose was still there, still driving the gameplay, still informing the story, and it is the last time I felt like the series was true to itself. For those of us who fell in love with the series for its historical immersion, its stealth mechanics, its character-driven narratives, Assassin's Creed Syndicate is a bittersweet reminder of what the franchise once was, and what it could have continued to be. It is the last good and true Assassin's Creed game, the final chapter in a story that has long since lost its way. While Ubisoft may continue to release bigger and more ambitious titles, for me, and for many others, Syndicate will always be the last time this series felt like it still had heart.
Track of my love.